Okay, so a man that needs no introduction, Joe Shelley, is joining us on stream now. Joe is responsible for numerous Warcraft expansions in his time. He's, I think, credited with bringing the darkness back to Diablo 3 with the Rise of the Necromancer patch. That was one of the big projects I think that he worked on, which is really cool. And then the game director for Diablo 4. Mainly responsible, I think, for combat and dungeon encounters. But I guess now you kind of just work on everything. But this is really cool. And so if you have anything to add to that, feel free.
I would just add that I am part of a team of people who makes all of this stuff. So
Yeah,
I'm partly responsible,
partly responsible.
but there are a huge number of people who work incredibly hard to bring all this stuff on WoW and on Diablo 3 and now on Diablo 4.
Cool. Yeah, that's really really great. And Joe, growing up, what was one of your favorite games?
Well, I played D. No, I did play D1 before D2, but I was playing on Kali, which was this it was a way to do peer-to-peer networking before it was added later. But yeah, I played a ton of D1. I beat it with all 3 classes, and then played D2 up until there was a patch where Frost Sorceress was especially powerful because the team had added immunity, or they had added resistance at one point to other elements, but Frost had a passive at the very bottom that bypassed it, that mechanic. And so I was playing Frost, and then they fixed that. So because they really wanted you to play multiple elements at once. But
that bug was added
was
back in D2R for a hot second on release. You could do that again, and now that was so interesting that bug just found its way back, or bug feature found its way back into D2R. I remember that happening. That's funny that you remember from way back when as well. So big Diablo. You like Diablo 1, you like Diablo 2. Peer-to-peer thing, you were trying to play with others, and I guess when you're tasked with making a game like Diablo 4, which has a fan base spanning Diablo 1, Diablo 2, Diablo 3, all pretty different games, different fan bases, how do you pay homage almost to all of the fan bases and give them all a little bit of something, in Diablo 4?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not even just different fan bases. It's also different player types, right? Like, people play games for you can sort of generalize into specific reasons and motivations, and certainly when we think about how to support different types of players, we do a little bit of that, but people play games for just all kinds of different reasons. And even as a player, you might play one game in a certain way and play another game. Like, you might be one kind of player in one game and a different kind of player in another game. And as you said, we also have folks who, played a lot of Diablo 1, or especially, and certainly many people who played a lot of Diablo 2, and remember those experiences, in their mind, and they remember the way that it made them feel, and they remember where they were in their life at that time, right? Like, when I was a big time when I was playing D2 was when I was in college, and I had an internship, and I had to get up really early in the morning, and I would play D2 way late in the night, and then I would be late, and it was awful. It was great for me. I got to play a lot of Diablo 2, but and so you remember the experience that you had in the context of what your life was like at that time, and like that experience. And there's no true way for us to really recreate that, because it's bound to that point in time at the same time.
Right.
But what we can do is we can look at the kinds of experiences that those games offer, and we can bring them back and be true to true to the aspects of those games, including situations where maybe there's something that worked differently or wasn't ever meant to work in a certain way, but we introduced that bug, not necessarily that frost immunity bug, but make sure that like games like D2R capture the same way that the game worked, even if that wasn't the way it meant to work, or if the way that it worked was an artifact of the architecture of the system at the time, like recreating that, even though it wouldn't necessarily work that way today.
Right.
And for Diablo 4, it's important for us to be able to have players from any Diablo game, and players who are new to Diablo, and players who like Diablo for different reasons, to feel like they can jump into the game and feel like, oh yeah, this has content for me, and this is a game that I feel at home in.
Right. And create some of the moments that you were talking about that we have from Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 for that new generation. You're responsible for bringing in an entire new generation to the Diablo franchise with Diablo 4 by making the game so approachable. ARPGs just in general are known to be a little bit more complicated than the average video game, and I think as a result of that, maybe the ARPG player base had been falling off a little bit just over the years, and it was really this more maturing player group. But Diablo 4 and the changes you've made, and by making it so accessible, brings in this new player base, and then also you're providing them with those same moments so that 20 years down the road, they're going to be talking about Diablo 4 like we talk about Diablo 2 now.
I mean, when you put it that way, it's a big responsibility. Like I hope that's the case. I hope we can continue to sort of do our job with Diablo 4 and deliver and sort of meet player expectations and exceed player expectations. And that's been one of the things that Season 2 has been great to see players responding to all of the quality of life changes and all of the changes that we made to sort of the pacing of the game, to sort of really sort of create that experience. And also, the great thing about having passionate fans is that when you release a game and people aren't particularly engaged with it, you just don't hear about things that could be better about it. And we don't have that problem at all.
No. That's what you all are for. Yeah, and us. Last personal, I guess, kind of question here. But so I went back to Sicily, where my family's from, and my great grandfather was a carpenter, and he would carve these incredible wooden doors for churches, and my family brought me to all of them. They're like, that was your great grandfather. He made that, and they were so proud of it. Over your career making video games, these things that everyone loves, is there something that you could isolate on that you had a really big part of either driving or making yourself, where you would show someone and be like, yeah, I did that, or I know there are teams that work on this stuff, but is there any particular accomplishment that you have a lot of pride in, or very proud of?
No, I get what you mean. When I was a kid, my dad would take me up on the roof. He was a builder. And so I was like 3 or something. Like this was a really bad idea. But
Don't do this at home.
I did a lot of holding flashlights and a lot of banging nails into things. Like, I'm sure there's some places with 400 nails in one spot. but
you were helping.
Well, yeah. But it's true that the feeling of having made something that you can touch or that you can point at, and I think it feels like with software or games, it can feel like, oh, this is like virtual, or is it like a real? But there are things like with Diablo, I worked on WoW for a while. There are things that you can make, and then players experience those things, whether it's a boss encounter, or I worked on Revive for Diablo 3, or I worked a lot on evade in Diablo 4, on the evade ability. And it's fun to have those things where you can sort of feel like you sort of touched it in the same way I was talking about hammering nails. And then you can kind of point at it and be like, yeah, like I helped make that, and it's a lot of times as working as the game director for Diablo 4, like my job isn't really about like going in and like implementing a design or something like that. In fact, if I'm going, like we have a ton of incredibly talented system designers and class designers and many other kinds of designers and artists and engineers and producers and QA folks and user experience folks and many other teams of people. And these are all extremely skilled people who know what they're doing. And if I'm going in all the time and saying like, oh no, like now this needs to work exactly like this, it actually will. It's actually can detract from the overall, because all of it is, if you look at, I was talking before about the 40% faster XP, and I talked about it in the Campfire stream, right, for Season of Blood, and it has such a meaningful difference in terms of leveling up. The same system of getting a Paragon point every quarter of a level feels totally different in Season 2 than it did in Season 1, just because of the pacing.
Right.
And but constructing that, we didn't just go in and multiply a number by 1.4. There were a bunch of different changes that came together, and it takes effect more toward the end, the later half of the leveling curve. And so a lot of things have to come together at once, and a lot of people are working on it together at once. So you really, it's really about sort of that level of direction, but it's absolutely fun to have something that I can say like, yeah, I worked directly on that thing.
Right. So to transition that into Diablo 4, I'm thinking of the Rise of the Necromancer patch, which you largely helped push into production. And I think with that patch, you introduced challenge rifts.
Sure.
And challenge rifts, I think, are one of the most underrated things that have been implemented into a Diablo game before. And it was the challenge in almost like a leaderboard style where everything was equal for the player. And that's usually in RPGs, it's like your gear is so important, your level's important. The stronger you play, the more you play, the stronger you're going to be, and you can't compete with someone that hasn't played as much or doesn't have the same gear as you. But you introduced these challenge rifts where everything was equal, and it was just the skill of the player that really shined with those and how fast you could clear it. Are there any thoughts, or have you given it any thought to implement something like that in Diablo 4?
It's a really interesting point. I think when we have a lot of players who are really excited about leaderboards. We announced leaderboards. Well, we've talked about leaderboards before, but we talked about it a little bit more about Season 3, and we're going to go into more detail about that in the Campfire chat tomorrow at 2:30 Pacific. And so when we have a feature like that lots and lots of players are waiting for, we want to make sure that we deliver we hit the experience that players are expecting, and we meet player expectations. To start with, like, we need to do that first, and then when we look at things like challenge rifts, which I think are cool, those are opportunities to sort of build on that momentum, because again, it kind of goes to the point about having players who are playing for different reasons or playing in different ways. So there are some players for whom bringing the part of the game is the way that you're manipulating your character, and part of the game is having a deep understanding of all of the systems and having an understanding of some of the interactions that maybe other players don't know that you know, or right. and then also building all of that out, right? And so when we think about the leaderboard experience, we want to grab all of that skill. I know you could break that down in different words, but I'm just going to generalize it as all of that skill, and sort of test that on the leaderboards. And then I think there are also opportunities to test like different elements of it in different ways, like you were talking about with challenge rifts.
Very cool. The question was leaderboards. Any last little bits that
yes. So leaderboards, I am going to talk a lot more about them at 2:30 tomorrow, and we have some mock-ups. So of course, as part of Season 3, we have Season 3 is still in development. We're still working on it, including elements of the UI for the leaderboards. Of course, UI is the key element of how you interact with leaderboards in any game. But you're going to get to see some mock-ups that are pretty close to what you'll see in Season 3. It's still in development, could be a little bit different, but that'll be great to see. And that'll really get a sense of like the scope of it. Like I said, we want to deliver on player expectations, like first and foremost.
Great. Well, probably part of any leaderboard or racing to a leaderboard, you're probably going to end up in nightmare dungeons at one point or another, whether you're trying to level real quick or just power up your glyphs. Right now, we hear a lot of feedback that nightmare dungeons, maybe once you start getting into them, they can feel a little bit repetitive. And I'm thinking of specifically maybe once you get to 21 and 21 to 100. At that point, when you're upgrading your glyph, really the only thing changing right now is the monster health and the damage that they do. Now, great implementation of the item power scaling, which I think is a great change, and you can actually measure that and see that when you're upgrading, so it feels a little bit different. But the gameplay doesn't feel necessarily that different when you're going from one to the other, because as the monsters are scaling up, you're also scaling up, or you scale up and then you're just bringing it to wherever you kind of are. So I was thinking, do you have any ideas or have you given any thought to making it more dynamic as you're scaling up? Something like maybe all the monsters get an additional attack that wasn't in their normal attack pool once you get past level 70 or something in a nightmare dungeon. Are there any thoughts to making them more dynamic or feel different as you scale up?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. With Season 2, we did a lot of work to improve the feeling of the open world, building Blood Harvest. Certainly there are lessons there for Helltide, right? And at the same time, Nightmare Dungeons are also a part of the endgame ecosystem, and they need, love too. And we did make some changes in Season 2 to Nightmare Dungeons with some of the affixes that, we have a lot of analytics and we can see like, hey, nobody is doing this affix, right? And we can hear as well from players who are talking about it. And so we did make some changes there. We made some changes to the layouts. But yeah, I absolutely think that the experience, because it is it's a fairly considerable system from 1 to 100. Mm-hmm. And when we look at all of the game systems like that, especially systems that take place over a period of time and have that kind of progression, we want there to be a variation in the experience. We have a system that we use for monsters that's tied to the world tiers, called that we call intensity, and basically it adjusts things like monster speed and so forth, but it also changes cooldown timings. And an interesting thing about it is that it helps us control the amount of incoming CC that players see, and we actually made some changes to that with Season 2 because we were seeing a lot of cases where after we increased density, especially in places like Helltides and also Nightmare Dungeons, we're seeing a lot in Season 1 of, just if you have a few monsters that CC, and now you have, 30% more of those monsters, well, you're going to get CC'd more, right? So we made some changes to how the intensity system works there, and that could be an opportunity to expand the system, like you're talking about.
Great, cool. There's some people that don't want to play Nightmare Dungeons, and I think there's a lot to be said about an end game system or just playing through the game where you can play your way, right? If you don't want to do an activity, then you can kind of get by. Maybe doing that activity is the best way, right? The most efficient way. But if you really don't like it, you can be less efficient but do something else. And we saw that with the implementation of Forgotten Souls from salvaging Legendary. So that was great. Right. So before you were handcuffed into a time-restricted Helltide in order to get Forgotten Souls. That was the only way you could do it. And you gave us another way. You don't always have to be marking your calendar when the Helltides are coming up. You can salvage all your Legendaries and you'll get these souls. You can sustain a little bit through that way. But right now, Glyph experience is one of the only factors that are locked behind one single thing, and that's Nightmare Dungeons. And the ability to play your way to level up your glyphs is locked behind Nightmare Dungeons. Have you given any thought to maybe an alternative to Nightmare Dungeons that may not be as efficient for Glyph XP, but another option to do that?
Yeah. So we are going to talk a little bit about Paragon Glyph XP in a slightly different context tomorrow. But the point stands, that is the only place right now where you can level up your glyphs, right? And I think that in general, we want to create sort of the most efficient way to do something. We want to incentivize different activities as having different rewards. uh, while allowing players to have some flexibility, like you're saying. And I think there is an opportunity there with Nightmare Dungeons and Paragon Glyph XP. Yeah.
Great. Speaking of play your way, I absolutely adore the story mode. I think pretty large consensus of people all love the story mode. I haven't heard a bad word about it. But then we got the skip campaign button, and so it felt like a lot of the development time, a lot of the lead up, you could tell it was so well hashed out. You have the best voice actors, the best cinematics in that story mode, and then all of a sudden it became this thing that you only do once, and everyone just skips the campaign now, and we don't get to relive. Repurposing some of the bosses was cool, so we get to see Doriel again now.
Yeah.
But outside of just taking the assets from the story mode, I think some people would really love to have that experience again. And it's not like you can't play the story mode. It's still there. Everyone can do it. But if you're starting out a new season, it's really there is little incentive to go that way if you're trying to be the best and level the best. So have you given any thought to it giving more incentive to starting out in the story mode as opposed to just skipping the endgame and dumping yourself right into endgame? And it comes to mind an idea would be like, if you complete the story mode, you get an automatic level 50 boost or something like that. Just something
sure.
where you could catch up to those that just skip to endgame, but you could play differently. Like your season could start out differently, play your way theme.
That's an interesting idea. One of the reasons that we are sort of careful about one of the reasons the skip campaign button exists is that story content is most exciting the first time you do it. Anytime you're listening to a story, part of it is the surprise and the anticipation and sort of wondering what's going to happen with characters. And I think that I like to say that for any given type of content or experience, there's like a correct frequency that it's fun to do, and those depending on the kind of experience and how replayable is that frequency is different. One of the things, we were talking about Diablo 3 earlier. We had bounties in Diablo 3 that targeted bosses, and the bounty system is one that you're replaying, and the whisper system that evolved from it is one that you're playing. It has a very high replayability, and killing a boss can have, if you're grinding for maybe you're trying to get like a targeted drop or something, it can serve that purpose as well. But a story boss usually has is at a lower threshold in terms of what the optimal rate is to fight that. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we saw actually with Malthael is the bounty would target it, and it wasn't really like, it had a bunch of cutscenes in it, and it's like, why do I have to wait for Malthael to drop all the things?
You just skip that one.
Well, it's like because there was a mismatch in terms of like the frequency that this activity is fun to do, and the frequency that this particular boss is designed to be. So we do want to look at, we want to be sort of cautious about incentives there, because we don't want to create a situation where the player has to make a choice. Like, it's like, I'm this kind of player and I want to have a lot of fun, and I want to give up a lot of efficiency. I think your point is really interesting about like, well, if you played through the campaign, then maybe you get something that sort of makes up for that time in terms of your efficiency. It's definitely a really interesting idea. I think we would like to, for the seasonal content to sort of live together with the story content even more seamlessly than it does today.
Cool. That's encouraging to hear. I'm glad that you would consider something like that. And the reason I love the story mode so much because you guys threw in nice little Easter eggs into it every step of the way. Like I remember hearing the Tristram music as a part, and I just got chills when that happened when I was playing through for the first time. There are all those little moments and Easter eggs that bring me back to Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Diablo 1 that are so important for my enjoyment of the game. And as we're on the topic of Easter eggs, there's been some developments in the search for the secret cow level. And I'm not sure how much you know about this, but we've found out now that you can kill a bunch of cows, get some special items that are very similar to how you summon the cow level in Diablo 2, And then at the end, you get this stamina potion, which if you guys don't know, the reason why the stamina potion's in there, because I think, because the Cow King drops a bunch of stamina potions when you kill him. So I love that little Easter egg too. But we've sort of reached a wall now with what we do with that stamina potion. Is there anything that you could give us give us a little hint?
I don't know anything about what I've never heard of any of this before, and I don't know what I'm completely at a loss here. But even if I did know what you were talking about, like it's been pretty cool to see players killing all of these cows for unexplainable reasons. I certainly, if I were a player who had put that effort in, I would definitely hang on to anything that I got out of it.
Okay.
Sure.
Do not consume the stamina potion. It's going to taste terrible anyway. It's been sitting there for 20 years. All right. Thank you for that. One of the other ways that players are really enjoying the game outside of Easter eggs is PvP. There is a strong community, and I applaud Diablo 4 for giving PvP to us right at launch, which is an incredible thing to commit to, and then committing to balancing it in the future. It's been 2 seasons now, and we really haven't seen any balancing yet in PvP because there's a lot of other things on the docket, on the plate. But I think the PvP community would really appreciate some attention eventually shifting to it. So have you given any thought, or has it been decided when maybe you're going to relook at the PvP system right now in Diablo 4? Because it's been very enjoyable, very entertaining, but after a couple seasons, it has started to sort of level out, I think.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting case because there are folks who played Diablo 2 and were PvPers in Diablo 2, and those folks will come to us and say, like, hey, one of the things I really loved in Diablo 2 is sort of the going hostile and sort of the unpredictability and the feeling of danger. Yeah. And so we did try to capture that with the PvP mode. It's sort of a small, like D3 does have PvP in it as well. Technically.
Does it? Well, the challenge risks? Because it was there at the beginning. Well, I thought it was removed.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, at one point, D3 had a brawling
They did at launch, too. Or it was shortly after launch, and then it existed for a little bit.
But my point is that the folks who know PvP from previous Diablo games are a relatively small audience. Mm-hmm. And what we would like to do is grow that audience and invite new people in, because of course you want to have people to VP with. And so I think what we did with the release of the game with Hatred's Chosen and some of the exclusive cosmetics that are tied to PvP is a good start. And I'd like to be able to continue to add more to that. We have a lot of really important priorities right now with adding more endgame, making changes to improve itemization. And so, those are really the things that we're most focused on right now.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, we're back.
So Joe was just explaining that looking to the future, maybe new ways to PvP, and the PvP zone is still getting activated because people are going in there to get that quick 5 bounty points from the whispers,
or 3 or 1.
Yeah. The boss one is really
just there, yes.
really
the boss one.
to do. I like that one a lot. But yeah, so you mentioned potentially new game modes, something maybe like even Diablo Immortal has a pretty cool PvP system and way to play that could be borrowed also and brought over to Diablo 4. It would probably involve some sort of queuing system. Maybe it wouldn't exist in the PvP zone world as they stand now, but something maybe in the future that could be really cool. And I think as you're implementing PvP, the thought back to challenge rifts and maybe having an option where everyone is equal as well could be very cool, because that removes the barrier to entry for maybe someone who doesn't have all the gear farmed, have all the levels farmed, and gives them an even playing field for just jumping right in and trying it out, and not feeling too discouraged.
Yeah, I think there are two. I think that I keep going back to this theme about how we have different kinds of players, but I think there are kind of two player fantasies there. There's a player fantasy that's like, I'm going to get all of my incredible gear, and then I'm going to go in and find someone, and I'm going to hit them with a rock,
Yes.
with a boulder,
One
a
shot
druid
'em.
boulder. And there's a player fantasy that's like, I want to show off my skill and my mastery of the game. And so those two fantasies sort of have two different rule sets. You know, you've got a rule set, like you're saying, where there's a more level playing field, and then you've got one that's more about like showing off all of the investment in your character.
Yes, for sure. Don't want to lose that, the power fantasy of getting all those good items and then getting to use them, right? That's what we all want at the end of the day. My next few questions are going to be status checks. So these are things that you've talked about, maybe in early development of Diablo 4 and then, on release. One of them is around trading. So the trading philosophy you mentioned at the beginning, and you've always said that it's going to be a fluid situation, and where you're going to be listening to our feedback, and then anything could change at any point in time if you are hearing overwhelming feedback on one side or the other. Has the trading philosophy in your mind played out the way the implementation that you have? Are you happy with it now? Do you think that there's room for change or just for it to be different? Or I think the ability to trade the materials this season was such a cool change. So I really like that. I think that was a great trading philosophy, a bit of a shift from honestly just being able to trade rares. The ability to trade those materials and share them was almost a shift in the trading philosophy itself. But status check, how are you feeling on the current trading systems in Diablo 4?
Yeah, so the trading of the materials was something that we brought to Diablo to Season 2 specifically because we heard from players that we also made Trade Chat Global back in Season 1. It ends up being used as all of the global chat. I think there are probably some improvements we could make there going forward. And whenever we increase the value of trading, we also have to make sure that on our end we're also protecting the player experience. We need to make sure that we don't have issues where players are able to exploit the game or dupe items or situations where we don't want anyone to be exploited by supporting the trading ecosystem that the players who most love trading want. We don't want it to result in anyone else having a worse time, whether those are other players or they're players who are farming gold or something. We don't want to. We want the net result to be a positive experience for all of our players, right? And at the same time, we've heard from there are players who really there are players who want to trade with their clan and trade more freely with their clan. There are players who want to trade as sort of one aspect of how they interact with the progression, like trading as progression.
Yeah.
And then there are also players who want to be able to trade to balance out, to help with target farming, essentially, right? So one aspect is like, hey, it's cool that this system has a lot of randomness in it, but one way to sort of limit or add some player control over that randomness it can be through trading, and that's also a great way to do it. So we definitely want to see, like you said, Season 2 with the with trading the materials. We've been really happy with how that's turned out. We want to continue to sort of move in that direction.
That's awesome. Very encouraged by that. I love the answer, love the response. Another status check, we'll call it, was in hardcore mode.
Yeah.
I think this is a quote from you, but I think you said that Scrolls of Escape were going to be rare and limited. And this was maybe a while ago before implementation. Right now on Hardcore, the Scrolls of Escape seem pretty readily available if you're a consistent player. And then the cheat death potions also, this was, before it was just Scroll of Escapes, then it turns out there was also going to be a cheat death potion on top of your Scroll of Escape, and now there's a lot of ways to really get yourself out of a sticky situation in Hardcore mode. And at what point does it detract from the hardcore experience? And from the feedback you've heard and the feelings of the development team, do you feel like the hardcore experience right now is where you want it, or
or Flame Shield as well on the sorcerers? Effectively allows another cheat death, and it's sort of limited to that class.
Right.
Yeah, it's something that I think we're very happy with Scrolls of Escape in terms of the functionality, and in terms of like providing more protection from disconnects, including the disconnect protection that came online in Season 2, without sort of compromising the spirit of Hardcore. And I think that we're sort of evaluating the effect of the cheat death potion and the elixir of cheat death, rather.
Yeah, sorry.
And that's, I don't know. I call Blood Harvest Blood Tide.
Okay.
And the effect that the way that Flame Shield is implemented in terms of its effect on hardcore as well. Yeah, okay. I think that those are both things that we're looking at actively right now.
Cool, interesting. And I'll just say that I think Scroll of Escape is one of the coolest things that happened to a hardcore mode in any ARPG that I've seen, because it was either you in Diablo 4 you'd alt F4, it would take you right out. I'm sorry, Diablo 2 you'd alt F4, take you right out of the game. Diablo 3 was a 10-second cooldown, so you kind of couldn't really just get right out of the sticky situation. And other ARPGs, it's mostly just you crash the game and you're out immediately. This is, you get that, but it's limited, which feels more it feels more impactful, your action, right? And I think it was such a great implementation, and I think just like the availability of them is something that maybe could be reevaluated, just to be top of mind when we're talking about hardcore.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. I'm playing hardcore in Season 2 and on my Necromancer, and I think I have about 6.
Okay.
So that
makes them feel special.
It's in Season 2. It's coming in about where it's something that we really need to keep an eye on, because that mechanic works when it if it's technically limited, but you have 1,000, then in effect it's not limited.
Right.
Limited needs to mean that you do care about using them. Absolutely.
Right. So trading. Playing, we have all of these like social interactions that are built into the game, but right now, outside of like clans, you've implemented the global trade chat. That's been great, but your background comes from a history of World of Warcraft, an MMO, and Diablo 4 is kind of sold as or advertised as ARPG with MMO elements. Things like Diablo Immortal, World of Warcraft have these great elaborate raid systems that are present in the game, and you can really get all of your buddies together and take something down together as a team. World bosses I thought might have had that effect, but you really can't necessarily control who you're all with when you go into a world boss, and between you and me, they just kind of drop to the ground pretty quickly. The world bosses aren't really much of a challenge, and that's another story. But talking about social features, are there ideas for the future of Diablo 4? Anything that you'd like to borrow from those other games that you've worked on that have these really nice social features to bring into the game?
Yeah, so we don't want to turn Diablo into World of Warcraft, right? These are really different games. Diablo is first and foremost an ARPG, and that's the sort of core that we want to make sure that we're always staying true to. Okay. Now, at the same time, I think that there are a lot of opportunities for more social activity in the big open world of Diablo 4. We want to do that. We want to be really thoughtful about how we do it, so that our ARPG fans always feel supported.
Okay. Great. Well, one last question. And I'll say for all of the Diablo fans watching, Diablo 4 fans in the audience, what is the one thing we should be looking for or looking to next? You know, we've got the campfire chat coming up. What's one of the things you're most excited about sharing with us? You know, it's in the back of your mind. You can't wait to tell us because you want to just see our reactions. What's that?
Well, I'm
thing you wanna
really
talk
excited
about?
to talk more about Abattoir Azir. Like we
Yes.
just teased it a little bit.
I know.
We're going to talk more about the expansion as well, which is really cool. But Abattoir is, you know, for our dedicated players who are reaching level 100 or are level 100, have been perhaps level 100 for a few days.
Yeah.
Those folks are ready for awesome new endgame stuff, and so I'm really excited to talk about that.
I could tell when we started talking about some of the other things from the campfire chat. You don't want to go into too much detail on that one. That's the one I'm most excited about and hearing more about. So I can't wait. I'm really interested to see the implementation of it. You see, I'm level 100. I am one of those guys that grinds, and end game bosses or just end game features and that scalability, that difficulty. I think season 2 in terms of difficulty was lacking, and it was one of the main questions I wanted to ask you was when is that difficulty coming? And you guys, before I could even ask the question in your opening ceremony, said this is what you guys are going to get. You're going to have something new. In the form of the Abattoir of Azir, and I'm super excited about that. So I'll be paying close attention, and you all should too. Joe Shelley, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm just so honored to be here and to get to talk to someone like you. And thank you for all of you've done for my favorite franchise, my favorite video game.
Oh, thank you. It's great to talk to you and all of you out there as well.
Thanks, Joe.